Good morning in Shanghai on this frosty, chilly winter's morning in Suzhou. These past few days, China has really been hit by winter. Up in the north, actually, it's covered in a blanket of snow. While we might not have the snow here in eastern China, it is still pretty frosty today. But we're going to power through because we're taking the train slightly north up to the banks of the mighty Yangtze River, one of China's mother rivers that flows all the way from Qinghai up in the northwest down to Shanghai in the east. Because we are heading to one of China's most historic and important cities, the capital of this province. Let's head to the city of Nanjing. One of China's vast fleet of the K high-speed rail trains is going to hurtle through the province of Jiangsu at over 200 kilometers per hour. Firstly around the banks of the mighty Thai Lake, visiting the likes of Wuxi and Changzhou, before eventually ending up in the capital, Nanjing, in around an hour and a half. And that's where we're off. So I'll see you there in 1 hour and a half. And here we are in the major eastern metropolis, the beautiful city of Nanjing. And I've got to say, we've only travelled maybe 1.5 hours by train. And it's a fair bit warmer here. I'm feeling slightly overdressed, I must admit. But I've got to say, I've visited many train stations around UK and China, and I have never walked out of a train station to a view like this. I tell you what, that is some way to welcome visitors to your city. How many times have you walked out of a train station after a long journey and been greeted with a huge advertisement or just grey buildings? And in Nanjing, this is what you get when you arrive. I think I'm gonna like this city. Now, as I mentioned in that intro, Nanjing is the capital of the province, Jiangsu. And Jiangsu is a pretty important province anyway. I mean, it's 5th when it comes to population, similar population to the country of Germany. And it's actually 2nd when it comes to GDP in China. So as the capital of a province like that, Nanjing is, of course, important. But the historical importance of Nanjing goes much, much further than that. And the first clue to that really is in that name, Nanjing. Even if you speak little or no Chinese, you may still recognize that character Jing, mainly from the capital of this country, Beijing. Bei meaning north and Jing meaning capital, Beijing being the northern capital. And it's the same character in the name Nanjing, only Bei is replaced with the term Nan, meaning south. So this is the south capital. Now look, I'm not going to insult your intelligence. You're a smart bunch. I'm sure by now you've worked out that this was, of course, once upon a time, the capital of China. In fact, not just once, but a number of times. I mean, as you probably know, China has changed hands between various dynasties and governments throughout its history. And many of them have chosen Nanjing as its capital, mostly based on its strategic location towards the east of the country, not far from the coast, and on the banks of the Yangtze River, which allows easy easy movement about the country, especially in times before cars. Now, it first became the capital at the start of what's known as the Six Dynasties era. That was in the 200s, 200 AD. And it continued to be the capital up until towards the end of the 500 AD. Now later, it also became the capital of the Ming Dynasty. And it was the Ming who built these walls. Some of the longest standing walls you'll see, still standing in China. And Nanjing remained the capital of the Ming Dynasty from when they overtook from the Mongols back in the 1300s all the way up to the mid 1600s. And these walls are still standing here in Nanjing. But the Ming were not the final people to call this city their capital. In 1911, under the leadership of Sun Yat-sen, the Qing dynasty were overthrown in the Xinhai Revolution, and China became what many believe to be the first republic in Asia. Now, initially, the newly formed republic inherited Beijing as its capital. Beijing had been the capital under the Qing dynasty. But in 1927, under Chiang Kai-shek, the capital was moved to Nanjing, primarily to consolidate power in the south. And it mostly stayed that way until officially 1949, with the fall of the Republic of China. Perhaps, given that this city was so important to the Republic of China, it doesn't come as too much of a surprise that this spot in the beautiful scenic Zhongshan Mountains was chosen as the final resting place of the founder of the Republic of China. And it is too worth noting that the Republic of China era, though not that long, was an era that really did shape modern China. It was when China overthrew its emperors and became the republic that it still is today. But it is also still quite odd for me. You know, the Chinese Civil War and the overthrow of the Republic of China and the Kuomintang, with them being replaced with the People's Republic of China under the Communist Party under Mao Zedong. This is, by Chinese standards, it's quite recent history. You know, it was only the late 40s and 50s that this was ongoing. And now, of course, I can't film in the tomb, but I did go in and look. And it's quite jarring to see the star of the Kuomintang. You very rarely see it displayed on the mainland. And, you know, unsurprisingly, like I say, the revolution, the communist revolution, was recent history. I often tell this story that when I first arrived in China all these years ago, I landed in Beijing airport and was greeted by the huge red flag with a hammer and sickle. And it was, it sort of made me step back a bit. It was a symbol I had only seen related to history. And, you know, now that's just normal to me because I've lived in China for so long. But then seeing the Star of the Kuomintang is, again, just a symbol I associate with history on reading about the war. So it's certainly quite an interesting place, and an absolutely beautiful place as well. These mountains are give you an incredible view across the city, and it's not just the tomb here. There are Ming tombs all around the mountains. Just so happens this is the one that's placed at the top. Now, unfortunately, I can't really make a fair video about Nanjing without discussing something else that happened here. You know, I did consider maybe not speaking about it. I thought really it's not my story to tell. But ultimately I think it's something that has shaped this city and this country. And also something that I think in the West, when we think of the war, we think in a very Western-centric way. And we rarely think about or talk about the things that happened in Asia and in China. So, as I mentioned earlier, this was the capital of China during the Republic of China era, which coincided with World War II. Now, being the capital and being a major hub of commerce made this a target for the fascist Japanese army. In 1937, the Japanese invaded. In the space of 6 weeks, 300,000 people were slaughtered in this city. These were not combatants, they were not soldiers, these were just citizens of the city, and they were slaughtered for committing the crime of being Chinese and living in Nanjing. And, you know, this is called the Nanjing Massacre, but the other name it's often given is the Rape of Nanjing. And I don't use that name lightly, but it sums up a lot of what happened here. It wasn't just the slaughters, there was mass rape, there was human rights abuses everywhere, there was looting. It was a really, really atrocious time. And there's no, you know, you can't hide from that. That is something that happened in this city, Nanjing. And it's something that is still very prevalent in the consciousness of Chinese people, not just in Nanjing, but across the country. And, you know, atrocities happened in that war. It happened in every theatre of that war. But what makes this different, not just the actual how brutal it was, but it's the fact that, you know, what happened in Germany, what happened with the Nazis was absolutely atrocious. But the Germans apologized for it, they acknowledged it. I've been to Germany a number of times, and the Germans are very, very aware of their history, and they you know, are very ashamed of it, and they, you know, do their very utmost best to prove that that is not what Germany is anymore. But that has not been the case with Japan. You know, it's not denial, but it's revisionism. What happened here is not even called the massacre in Japanese language. They call it the Nanjing incident. It's not taught in schools. Even recently, there was a sculpture of comfort women, who were the women that Japanese soldiers took from other East Asian countries to force into the sex trade, and they were sex trafficked. There was a statue commemorating them women put up in San Francisco, and there was uproar from the Japanese government. And this is Japan. It's a modern superpower. It's a you know, a Western ally. It's a friend of the USA. It's a friend of Europe. And yet, you know, what they're doing is engaging in historical revisionism. And I think that's what hurts the Chinese the most. I think when I've spoken to people about this, and people have asked me before, they've said, why do Chinese people hate Japanese people? No, that's not true. I don't think any Chinese people hate Japanese people. But, you know, it's a real sticking point, and it's something that I think makes it very hard to move on from. I am aware that I'm British, and some of the things that my government have done over the years have been absolutely horrendous. And yeah, again, they have not really held their hands up and said what we've done is terrible, but we at least have an understanding of it to an extent and an acceptance of it. But that just hasn't happened with Japan, and this is not a historical gripe. This is a modern day thing that is still happening. So you know, that I had to mention that. I can't come to Nanjing and not speak about that. There is a huge memorial hall near the site of where a lot of the bodies were buried from this, on a site called the Pit of 1,000 Bodies or 10,000 Bodies. But it's also worth just looking at where we are and looking at what Nanjing has become and the way it has rebuilt from the war, and the way that it is now a modern metropolis, but also holds on to its history. And I think it says a lot about the perseverance of the Chinese people. China has not had an easy history. It has suffered civil wars, it's suffered war atrocities, it's suffered changes of dynasties time and time and time again, often through bloodshed. It has suffered mass famines. And look at the country they've created. I think the question I get asked the most is, why do you love China? Why do you want to stay in China? And that really is one of the things that keeps me here, because that passion and that desire to continue to build is something that is just encapsulated in places like Nanjing. So I don't want this to end on a dampener, and I don't think that is a sad point to end on. Of course, it's not something that's nice to think about, but to look at what Nanjing has become is something that's quite, it can be quite moving, I think. So thank you very much, Nanjing. Thank you for letting me come and visit. One day is certainly not enough. Hopefully I'll see you all soon. Okay, take care everyone. Zhejian from Nanjing.